Okay.
Is this where we're supposed to ask if we're live?
Yeah. All right. Welcome everybody. My name is Kate. This is Kendric.
Hello.
And we are going to be doing our discussion for the first book in the Powder Mage series. This is the first installment, I guess, of what I'm calling Kendric Recommends, which is basically a bunch of book series that Kendric has recommended to me that I have not gotten around to. This is a little bit of a weird one because, oh, hello. This one's a little bit of a strange one because I actually started Promise of Blood in April or May of 2018 and recommended it to Kendric. And then he finished the entire series, and I only made it through this one and then part of the second book. So we'll kind of give an overview of Promise of Blood, then we'll get into non-spoiler thoughts on it, and then we'll have a spoiler section if anybody has read the book. Feel free to stick around for that and our thoughts on that part. So Promise of Blood is what's generally considered flintlock fantasy, and it follows basically, what is he? A field marshal who ends up working with a group to overthrow the king, and then sort of the ramifications of overthrowing the king and running the country after it's been a monarchy for that long. So, yeah. Anything you'd add to that synopsis?
I don't remember when you recommended it, but I remember being like, well, that sounds interesting. And then I started reading it, and then I think I just went the entire way through.
Yes.
Without stopping at all. I always do audiobooks because I don't have time to point my eyeballs at things. And it was a lot of those sitting in my car at a parking lot somewhere until the chapter ends before I could actually get out. I was late for a lot of things because of that book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good one. Yeah. I mean, it's if you like guns in fantasy, it's definitely one of the major ones that gets recommended. The other one is Django Wexler has a Flintlock fantasy series that is more heavily military fantasy. This one is a little more approachable, I feel like, for an average audience. Hey, Maria. Yeah, I know there's a bunch of people that are going to be reading it in April, so I'm definitely curious to see what everybody thinks of it when they get there. So do we want to talk general thoughts on it?
Well, how much more? Was that enough of a synopsis? You wanted to do a synopsis?
I did. Do you want to get into more details?
It's up to you. Whatever you want to do.
Okay.
I finished it like weeks ago for my second read through in 5 years. And you finished it like an hour ago? Whatever, yesterday?
No, yesterday.
Yeah,
I'm a procrastinator, but not quite that bad. Okay, that's not true. I definitely finished several book club books like right before the live show. No, I think I don't want to get too much into spoilers in this beginner section, so I don't want to get too into some of the details. I will say that for me, I still really like this as a quasi-historical. It takes place in a time period where industry is starting to become a bigger thing, but so it's that transition from pre-industrial to industrial. So you have factories that are coming up. There's unions that are part of the story, especially because some of the countries that are in the world aren't okay with unions. So you kind of get that dynamic. All of the armies are kind of Napoleonic era. If anyone is familiar with that, it's roughly 19th century.
There's totally not the French, and then there's totally not the sort of Polish, I guess, or Hungarian, maybe.
I think it's less modeled. So like Django Wexler's series is much more modeled directly on the French Revolution and Napoleon. This one is more influenced by it. I know McClellan, when he has done interviews about this series, he's talked about the fact that it was heavily inspired by the Richard Sharp series that Bernard Cornwell has written, which is straight historical fiction of the Napoleonic Wars. So this definitely has those elements in there. The magic system, there's at least two magic systems that are in here. In this first book, you get the introduction to the powder mages, which are, they have the ability to basically consume black powder.
Yep.
And then use it to have different abilities related to guns. Like Daniel can float a bullet. I never remember
he can
exact.
Load 2 bullets into a gun and shoot both of them and hit 2 targets.
Yes.
At way beyond what the actual firearm could do.
So he's like Daniel Two Shot, I think is his nickname. So you have that group, and then they're kind of threatening the standard fantasy mage order that has been in power along with the king this whole time. So you kind of have that dynamic of the powder mages being a newer, potentially more powerful group against the regular mages who don't particularly like having that threat in play.
And it's very clearly a showcase for his sort of political leanings and kind of poking fun at how like established mage guild can get really kind of luxurious and and kind of lose sight of their responsibilities and the how much power they have. And so when a well-organized military force comes in with less powerful magic but just better organization and gumption, they just kind of steamroll them.
Yeah, and there's definitely a huge dynamic. Like, I think, so the main country's Adro, which is where they've overthrown their king and are in the midst of figuring out what they're going to do next. And the main character, one of the main characters, Temas, is this field marshal who's kind of thrown this coup with a group of mercenaries, I think bankers. I don't remember who else is in there, but
the head of the union.
Yeah,
because the union wasn't popular with the previous king and a couple of other church.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
and so you have kind of this group of people that are trying to figure out what's next, and then there are some neighboring countries. So it does have some political maneuvering in terms of now they have to see how their neighboring countries are going to respond to that and how that affects the different alliances that historically have been in place. I think that's less of a focus, I feel like, in this. There's like, it's there, but it's really more about the effect of the revolution on Adro, at least for the first half. Yeah.
They start going outside Adro in the other books. So it definitely gets more into that. But one of the things I do like about it, and it's not really a spoiler, I mean, it's on the very cover, is the guy sitting on the throne. And then there's blood in some of the covers. I think it's obscured behind the text here, but on the image, it's a bloody throne with the guy sitting on it. So it's not a spoiler to say he kills the king in like just before the first chapter. Actually, he kills the king and wipes out the whole cabal of sorcerers in like this one bloody night. And then the rest of the book is dealing with the aftermath of that, because so many of the books focus on leading up to the revolution, and that's the Glorious Revolution. And this one is the revolution's just happened. Now we have a lot of people to feed and a lot of logistics to figure out, and a lot of very angry lower noblemen and all of it, and neighboring countries that are like, you can't do that.
Well, and who you can afford to piss off, because within Temas's kind of group of, I don't know, council, I guess is what you would call them. They don't always get along. So it's figuring out like, how far can I push this before I'm in trouble? Because if I don't have the church on my side, then that's going to be a problem as far as like gaining the goodwill of people and all of that. So there's a lot of that maneuvering.
It's a church that's very, very emblematic of like peak Catholic decadence as well. So there's a lot of gold, everything, a lot of estates, a lot of those kinds of things. So it's really like the worst time period of Catholic excess.
Yeah, it definitely hammers a bit of that. And we'll get into some of the things. I think there are definite flaws to Powder Mage. Things you can talk about that might not have been done as well. It did come out in 2013, where some of these like representations was not as big of a focus, and you can see it.
And
I
it's his
think
debut novel, right?
it's his debut, so I'm willing to cut a fair amount of slack on that. I think one of the things to know going in, if you pick up the series, is that it does not represent women particularly well. It's not the worst I've ever seen, for sure.
It's more cringe. It's not like awful. It's like,
Yeah.
ugh.
And
Ugh.
there's some interesting. So one of the other characters, it's multi POV. So you have Tamas, the field marshal. You have his son Taniel Two Shot, who kind of has sort of this. He's the frontier, like crack shot sniper type
He went and
character.
spent time in totally not North America, where there's the frontier
Yeah,
town with the
yeah.
totally not Native Americans. Yeah.
Except that they have red hair and freckles
Yeah.
instead of being
Yep.
what you would expect. So, and then Adamat is an investigator who's kind of dealing with a possible conspiracy that might be related to the monarchy of Adro that Tamas has basically told him to go investigate. And Adamat's wife, Faye, is one of the better female characters in the series because you see her for a split second and then she doesn't really participate in a lot of it. But she's sort of a stronger, she's maternal, but she also doesn't really take crap from people, and she has her own strengths versus like household management and knowing people. Like, it's very clear that Adamat relies on her a lot to get him connections that he might not otherwise be able to use. So she's an interesting character. There's also Vlora, who is another powder mage right around the same age as Taniel. She is kind of the center of some of the things that I don't like as much in Promise of Blood, and that I've heard improves a lot in later books, which you can speak to.
Vlora's like character growth and development is emblematic of McClellan's ability to write characters over his career. By the time you get to the end of the 6th book, she's a much more interesting character.
And just to be clear with that, there's the original Powder Mage trilogy, which this Promise of Blood is the first book of that. And then, there's a sequel trilogy that is called Gods of Blood and Powder, I think.
It's just combinations of the word blood.
And that picks up after the events of Powder Mage. And you get some of the... I know Vlora is one of the main characters in that one, and then there's a couple others. Okay, fair. So, no, we won't name anybody else because it might be spoilers for Powder Mage. So you do kind of see that transition. I think that Promise of Blood doesn't put Taniel at his best, because it starts out with some major friction between Taniel and Vlora, who had been engaged. Stuff happened, and then they become less together. And a lot of it is Taniel whining about how things turned out and kind of throwing a pity party for himself a little bit.
Well, yeah, and then the 2nd book, but yeah.
And the start of the 2nd book, but we won't get into that because we're talking about Promise of Blood. Yeah. But he gets a little obnoxious with the whining. There's also Kapol, who is a companion to Taniel, and she is from the quasi North America.
Fortressa, which is the frontier lands that has several colonies that have been warring with each other and have been making allies with the local tribes based off of which group is with which colony.
Yeah.
And so
she's one of the local tribes people who ends up helping out Taniel. She's an interesting character. You don't see a ton of her. She is mute. And so she mostly communicates through hand gestures, so you kind of get that element a bit.
She's a pretty important character in the back half of the book, and then in the subsequent books.
Vlora's great. I think you don't get a lot of her in Promise of Blood. You get a little bit, and you get a lot more in Crimson Campaign.
And you get like progressively more as the series goes on. So that's a good reason to stick with it. I almost wish that he could go back and rewrite this book now. Which is like a revisionist thing, but like I think he would do a better job of it now, and he wouldn't have to change much.
Yeah.
It's just like one quick edit, rewrite, change some dialogue, change some behaviors. It would be a lot less cringy. Because the overall story isn't too bad.
No, it's definitely not bad. I think this was my third time reading this, and we both highly recommend the audiobook if you pick this one up and if you haven't read it before, because the narrator is Christian Rodskut, and unfortunately he got sick, so he wasn't able to do the final book of the second series, but the voices that he does and the emotion that he brings to it is just killer. It's so good.
It's yeah, it really made the book.
Yeah. I don't like physically reading it anymore when I can just listen to him talk about it.
Oh, and what was the housekeeper, the nanny? Not the nanny. What was she? She was the
Nyla. Nyla is the other female character. And I think I don't want to get into my thoughts on Nyla too much until we get to like the spoiler section, because I have some thoughts on that, not necessarily negative ones, but some thoughts on that one. So we'll keep it non-spoiler for now, and then we'll get into that here in a little bit. Let's see. I want to make sure I hit some of these other comments. Yep. Yeah, I've only gotten partway through the second one, so I still have to get through those.
And so I binged them all, and so I have a hard time remembering where one book ends and the next one begins. That's why I haven't read anything else since I finished this book, because I was trying to make sure I don't accidentally spoil it, because the events kind of go pretty directly into each other from what I remember. So it's a little bit more like Lord of the Rings and a little bit less like, I don't know, the more episodic stuff. It's like,
yeah, kind of it probably is better to read back to back. And we are going to pick up Crimson Campaign in March, so we'll keep going with the series. Yeah, agreed. I have Crimson Campaign here. I never remembered the right direction to go, but yeah, I agree. They have super cool covers, and even the sequel series has really nice ones too. So those are really fun.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the sequel series now, but I can...
No, not yet. You gotta wait. Anything else we want to talk about?
It's all spoilers.
Non-spoiler.
It's all spoilers, because it's the way the story goes is really hard to talk. I mean, there's mystery. Yeah. There's political intrigue. There's violence. There's not as much violence as you think, but the violence that's there gets pretty intense.
Yeah, it does. I don't think it's super gory, but I definitely think, you're talking about guns and magic and there's a scene where people get like vaporized or melted or that's
that
true.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
But it's not like lingery. I guess if you made a movie adaptation, you could make it lingery excessively, but it's a lot more like, if you just look at the body count of named and unnamed characters, it's pretty high by the end.
Yeah. So that's very true. And I think overall, Promise of Blood, you don't do the booktube world as much, so I don't know if you have like what you would consider like a star rating. I would probably give this overall 4 stars, just because I think the first time I read this, it was 5 stars and I just raved about it. Rereading it for the third time is I noticed some more of the flaws. So I think I'm not quite willing to give it the full 5 out of 5, but I would probably give it to 4.
I think the hard part for me is that it's reminding me of the 6-book and 5 novella and short story collection world that I really adored. And it's easy, especially with all these series, to forget about a somewhat lame first book when you start putting it in the framework of all of them. The series as a whole, I'd probably give 5 stars. Highly recommend. The first book is one of those, I don't want to tell you to skip it, and I hate to say, oh, just read 5,000 pages and then it starts to get good. I hate that. That's so unhelpful. But read the first 5,000 pages, then it gets good. Like
not the first 5,000, because they're only like 500 pages
they're not
apiece.
It's not like Wheel of Time. It's they're not that enormous, but I feel like the issues that I have with the characters in the first book are easily overshot by all these stuff that happens. I feel like it's a really good balance of epic. This is about the whole world, but also still about these people. And it's really, I think he strikes that balance really well. And that's where I probably agree with something like a 4. Because sometimes with the big epic ones, you lose sight of the actual humans.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get so much into the human things, you like, I don't care about these people. Why do I care about these people? And I think this is a pretty good balance of like, especially as we get to the spoiler section, what starts to happen where it seems like it's going to be this small, and then it starts to grow and get out of hand, and you're like, oh god, this is a world problem. This isn't just a Thomas problem.
Yeah, and I feel like some super character driven readers like Maria, I'm going to be really curious to hear what you think of this one. I think it might be a struggle in places because I think that you get an introduction to these characters, but it's not super character driven. It's really much more like world driven and I would say plot driven.
Yeah, I
Than
think there's
characters.
characters though, because like
Oh no, I
Nyla's
agree.
story arc.
I just mean that I think your focus is not as much on their relationships. It's really an introduction to the characters in this one, and then you kind of see that expanded some. But this is your intro to these.
But it's also, I think, really clear. It's really clear to me, and I highly suspect that he meant to write 3 books in the beginning. Like it was very much a first of 3.
Yes,
because there's an ending, but like it's not.
Yeah, it's like
really.
It's tying together some threads, but he's definitely leaving things open. And the ending has a lot of interesting implications for the world going forward. So I think if you like super, I consider this fairly fast paced, especially in the second half.
Yeah.
If you like having guns in your fantasy, if you like some of these sort of council maneuvering, trying to figure out conspiracies that might be threatening your like revolution, basically. If all of that sounds good, I definitely recommend picking up Powder Mage. Just go in knowing it's a debut, knowing it has some stuff that is a little bit annoying. Like if you've read a lot of modern, it's still modern fantasy, but if you've read a lot of fantasy in the last couple of years, there's some things in there that I think if you were writing it now, he would have done better.
But it never struck me as that bad. It was more eye roll and less throw the book
Yes,
across the room.
Agreed. I very much agree on that. So definitely one we'd recommend. I'll answer a couple of these and then we'll move to spoilers. Yeah. I'm excited to hear what you think of that one.
I do like how they mixed the magic and the different types of magic in the first. There's more as they go forward, but the balancing, so it's not just the super wizards that are impossibly powerful and they can destroy everything. Because the best part, I think, that we didn't mention is they're allergic to gunpowder.
Yes.
Yeah. So they can't be near these guys for too long, or they start getting hives and they can't, like, their eyes puff up and they get itchy and they start to be unable to actually do magic if they're stuck around gunpowder too long.
Yeah, I really love the interplay between the two magic systems, especially because you have like the standard traditional mages are actually trying to hunt down and eradicate. Like certain groups of them are actually hunting the powder mages. So there's a very strong like versus dynamic to that I really liked. And it gets the religion is very interesting. I liked that a lot. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
With what happens just both with the church and religion, it gets interesting.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm definitely excited for that. Nice. If you continue, Christy, you'll have to let me know what you think of it. Because I'm curious to see how it goes. Yeah. Okay, so I think we are going to go ahead and shift to spoilers. Let me see if I can throw together a banner. Do I have banner? Just so I don't... look at that, I do.
You could have had
I could have had the non-spoiler chat up, but I didn't.
Put it in post.
No, can't do that. No. I mean, I guess I could, but... Okay, so if you have not read this one... This is where we'll dip into spoilers. So thanks for joining us. And again, I'm curious to see how this goes for the groups that are going to be reading it in April.
Come back after you read it.
Yeah, definitely come talk to us once you've read it and let us know what you think. Thanks, Maria. Let's see. Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So now that I'll do a very brief thought on this because we'll get into the spoilers for Promise of Blood. But that first third of Crimson Campaign, he is so annoying. The pity party he throws himself is just like, come on, man. But
I haven't even read it in like 4 years now. And actually more than that, I guess. And I still remember that being like, oh, dude, come on.
Yeah. He just, I do like that Coppols basically has no time for his crap in that one. But yeah, I mean, I agree.
We're in spoiler zone, right?
Yeah.
So in his defense, he did shoot God in the face. That's going to leave you a little bit messed up, but he definitely lingered a little more than I wanted. I think I'd be kind of messed up too.
That's fair.
So, but yeah, I think that could have cut it down.
Why are you not showing Banner? Show Banner. Maybe it's because
the chat button over.
Yeah, the chat button might go over it. Oh well, we'll figure it out.
Well, now you're warned anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we can get into some of that. I think I want to talk about Nyla first, because I think what Nyla brings to the story is very interesting, because you get sort of the royalist perspective, and not even a royalist who had power in the previous regime. She had what she knew.
Right. And so was not right, because she was not very happy at the beginning, but it was what she got it all taken away.
Yeah.
And that's not cool.
Well, and I feel like she does a good job of representing kind of a common perspective, which is, I don't really care whose butt is in the throne, as long as like I can live my day to day. I think that is a really interesting perspective, and having her kind of be this character who interacts with Olam, who's one of my favorites. I guess I didn't mention Olam at the beginning, but he's one of my favorite side characters. There's so many side characters I love.
And Olam's not even a side character. He's not a point of view character, but he's there a lot. And I
love him. He's so sassy.
I love him a lot, but he's a little bit too much of a MacGuffin for me.
He is. I'll give you that.
He's a little bit overpowered. He's a little bit too good. He's too sweet.
Yeah, but I love him.
I get it. But he's like a little.
Oh, and as a side note, well, I mean, nobody who's watching this hasn't read the book, but
you've been warned.
But he's the second to Tomas. Like, he's basically his bodyguard.
Yeah, bodyguard.
For anybody who's not remembering, I guess.
Yeah. And he doesn't have to sleep. That's his magic power.
Yeah, I love the sass level of Olam. He's just so fun.
No,
I'm so afraid he's going to die by the time we get to the end. I don't want to give you any
spoilers on that one. I'll tell you, at the very least, he gets time to have a character arc.
Okay, fair.
That's not a spoiler.
Okay.
But I do think that Sabon was set up to be the first major casualty.
I was so sad about it, even though this is the third time. So I knew it was coming. That broke my heart. It does every time, because I love the dynamic between him and Tomas as old friends who have supported each other forever. And as more of one of the only other experienced powder mages. Yeah. I really like him. So I was sad about that. But it does bring home the idea that there's real casualties. Yeah. It's not just
he does
nameless
kill people off in the book series. He's not full Martin about it, but he's prepared to do it. And he does it, I think, more often like that, where it's like, whoop, and you're like, what? And not a lot of long lingering, Martin style. I shouldn't pick on Martin so much, but I'm gonna not a lot of long lingering, let's just stare at this for a while. It's a lot more well, this is what happens when you're standing outside. There's a gunfight. Bullets go around. So I think he really capitalized on the emotional impact of his death.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I think he was really good at, with the way he treated deaths and attacks and surprises and stuff. Is he doesn't waste the opportunity for it to be impactful.
Yep.
Sometimes maybe a little bit cliched, or maybe a little bit overdone, perhaps. You're really, really driving home that this dog died, and I'm still upset about that.
Oh yeah, Pitlaw. That was sad. But I think I'm willing to overlook some cliche stuff, because again, this is a debut, and I like to cut some slack on debuts, because you don't really know what you're doing yet.
No, and you reach for the cliches because you want to make sure your book fits in with the genre, right? We were talking about this before with something else. You have to walk that line between using too many cliches and just straight up lifting scenes from other things,
yep,
or making something that has no place in the genre whatsoever because it doesn't share any of the tropes we want. Like, I'm going to do flintlock fantasy, but there's no magic and there's no guns and it takes place in the future. You're like,
That's
okay, but then you're not
really flintlock fantasy.
You're not doing that. You got to have, I mean, you need to have the strong military commander type. You need to have shootouts. You need to have obscured by black powder smoke. Like, these are all tropes you kind of have to have if you're going to do flintlock kind of stuff, if you're going to do sharp inspired flintlock fantasy.
Well, and I think that, well, he's not, I think you can get into, this is military fantasy, but McClellan is not, again, it's hard for me not to compare to the Django Wexler series because that series is being written by someone who's literally a war gamer who is obsessed with strategies and like all the military like terminology and making sure everything's correct there. McClellan isn't doing that. McClellan is doing, again, it feels very cinematic to me. I think his story is so much more approachable because it's not everybody pictures in their head when they're reading, but I think his is the most conducive to that. It doesn't get bogged down in like troop formations. It's very fast-paced, very exciting writing. I think he does action scenes really well.
Because he said it wasn't necessarily the Sharp book series that inspired him. It was the TV show.
Yeah.
He's like, what if that, but magic? And that's like basically what he said his premise was. And then
he said he was already thinking of guns and fantasy was a thing he wanted to explore. And then he had watched the show and was like, oh, well, there it is.
Never mind that Sharp is written by somebody who has visited the locations and has
Cornwell is obsessed with that.
He has created scenarios that happened and found somebody who was not documented very well and just put Sharp in as that guy.
Yep.
And he did that so many times. And you're like, oh yeah, somebody breached this wall. Well, not Sharp, obviously, because I could just fit that in and then it could be close enough to
well, history. And I think there's certainly an element of that to Tomas, because Tomas goes through some stuff that's like, average person's not making it through that one.
No.
So he is a bit of the Sharp type character where he's just almost overpowered, and there's some conveniences that you overlook because he's just cool.
Well, there's
he's just fun.
There's some real life examples of people like that with your Jack Churchills and your Donald McBain
that's
and
very
those
true.
kinds of people.
That's
so there have been people who are like, how exactly are you alive right now? This shouldn't be. A number of American revolutionaries that had multiple bullets in their body and just survived.
Yeah.
So like there's some precedent for that in real life, but it is definitely over the top. Although with Sharp, that's like no one's this lucky. But
Sharp is more obvious because he's in all of the important Napoleonic battles, which is like
you're like, hey, you can't move
because he's in Trafalgar at one point, and it's like, how did you get here?
You were in India.
So it's not quite that bad. It's not quite that low.
But at least with the powder mages, they do he does some hand wavy that if the black powder is like a stimulant and it helps you heal faster and it can keep you from dying. So like there's a lot of kind of hand wavy nonsense there where you can be like, oh yeah, he just keeps snorting black powder until he goes blind. And that'll keep him from bleeding out from the gut wound or somehow, right? So that's another MacGuffin, but
what else do we want
gods.
to? Yeah, religion. We do have to talk about the gods and the religion aspect because I think that is one of the best parts of especially the second half of Promise of Blood. So reading it again, I still really enjoy up to like the last third. But that last third is where it always kicks off for me in Promise of Blood, that I just like my heart races and I get super excited about it because you get to see you get all these details on, there's like a chef character who has been claiming since Midway that he is like the god Adam reborn.
Yes.
And nobody believes him until like you get the reveal in that last third.
Well, there's a couple spots where it's like, that's really not, that can't be.
Yeah.
And they're
like he's leading towards
he's like, okay, so he's probably just an act, right? That's what they land on the one thing. It's like, he's just an act. And then Owen's like, an act who could just create food? It's a very strong act. Let's go over here now and change for this conversation topic. And it's like, maybe you guys should look into this some more. But
Yes, you get that element, and then you finally get the reveal on Kresimir and the fact that like he's not just God who left. Like you get almost this sort of like sense that he's not even necessarily a god. He's like some kind of powerful magic user who's hopping worlds.
Yeah.
which kind of made me think of like
Sanderson, yeah.
which isn't surprising since McClellan was taught by Sanderson.
And they're close, I guess, or relatively close as much.
I think they live pretty close.
Yeah,
too.
I think they talk to each other frequently.
Yeah,
I've seen interviews and stuff between them, or interviews with both of them before.
Yep.
So,
but so that reveal at the end with Kresimir and like the implications of the fact that not only did he get shot by Taniel, but he's out for blood for all of Adro. And like, what the heck are you going to do? Because you have Kresimir, who's this very violent god that's on the side of Kez, the neighboring country, and is willing to decimate Adro.
Because they killed the king.
And then you have Adam, who's basically providing food and moral support, but he's not really like a fighting god.
Well, not yet.
Okay, fair.
No spoilers, but he's tricky. The thing to remember is that none of them are good. None of the gods are actually good.
And I do like that implication. I like the idea that you had these sorcerers basically visit and establish everything and then just kind of bugger off.
Yeah.
And then having them return years later.
Yeah.
I think that perspective is interesting because I think it's fun to see the effect that them setting up the country and then how religion basically was built on that. And then having them actually come back. Because there's so much of that you don't expect to have your gods return. Half the people don't even believe in gods anymore.
Despite the fact that they were there, they were real, they still are real, and now they're pissed.
Yeah, like that element is super cool. Let's see. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't care about the realism with that. Well, and he's a powder mage. I mean, you can kind of like hand wave some of that stuff because you can just talk about the magic.
Yeah, that's just magic.
Yeah. So
turbojet thing on it.
I really do think, I know I've heard some complaints about like some of the realism with McClellan as far as whether or not there could really be like 1 million people on the field.
I was thinking about that when I was reading it. And they never actually say there are 1 million people on this field. It's the guys on the wall saying there's got to be 1 million of them over that wall. They just keep coming. Yeah. And it's like, there's never a factual state. It's always from the perspective of people who have been killing Kez soldiers day in, day out, and they just keep coming.
And again, I think there are probably complaints to be made because McClellan is he's not like hardcore into military history. Like, I don't think he's trying to make it super historically accurate. He does a pretty good job with the guns. Mm-hmm. I feel like magic aside, but both of us have shot black powder rifles, musket. Or is that a musket? I never remember. Okay. Yeah. And so like, I feel like he describes the experience fairly well, especially the clouds of smoke, because you do get a lot of that.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is done fairly well. Again, his writing style is not going to appeal to everybody, but I think I personally find him a very exciting, very compelling prose style that works really well for me. So it has its flaws, but I really enjoy it.
I think the problem is when you're seeking realism in an environment where people can create fireballs, is going to be like, well, where do you draw that line then?
Well, and I really do want to. So once we read this series, it might be fun to pick up at some point that Django Wexler series, because I think it is very interesting to contrast them, because I think the people that really want very heavily military fantasy are much bigger fans of that series, because it is so much more that, and it's so little magic, at least in the first one. And I didn't actually finish the first one because I got kind of bored in parts. But there's so little magic in that series. And I think that's what I love about McClellan's, is that it has more of the magic and the religion element, which is just more kind of in my wheelhouse of stuff I like. So,
well, and I did like having, you could claim it's obvious. I don't know. I think it was an interesting dilemma to have the Adamat investigating.
Yep.
And everybody has a reason to stab him in the back at one point. So it's like, oh crap, who's
I really liked that element. I'm kind of glad that Charlemagne was the traitor because I hated him and I wanted him to die. So
Yeah, he was definitely a jerk, but they were all kind of jerks. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I kind of liked Lady Wenceslas. She was cool. I mean,
Yeah.
like standard, not a special character necessarily, but she was interesting. And I liked the reveal that she and her husband didn't come from the nobility.
Yeah.
Because it made more sense for her to be supporting Tamas if, like, she wasn't killing lifelong friends.
Right. Well, and then the Union guy.
Yeah, Ricard.
Ricard is definitely much more prominent later too. He gets
cool. He
becomes a very big character in a lot of ways. He's again not always a nice man.
No. He's not really a good guy, and he I mean, I don't remember if it's in this one or if it's in the next one that they talk about how many wives he's gone through, and like the fact that like he's kind of a womanizer type character.
Yeah.
But he's funny and like kind of down to earth, which I appreciated.
Yep. Yeah. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention because I forgot about it was crap, what's his name? The drunk captain of the guard on the wall.
Gavril.
Yeah,
Gavril / Jacola.
I totally forgot about that until the end. I was like, oh, I forgot about that. Like,
yeah, no, I loved that reveal because I absolutely didn't see that coming when I read that the first time. That reveal was super fun, and I am excited to get back to Crimson Campaign because even though I loathe the sections with Taniel being pity party man at the beginning of that, there's also a really cool section with Tomas and Gavril and some of Vlora, all these characters that you really get to see more of them functioning as a military unit.
Yeah.
And that is awesome. I loved parts there. I remember scenes that literally had my heart racing because they were so exciting and so compelling. So I can't wait to go back to that.
Some of the really crazy stuff that happens to Taniel dealing with the god he shot in the face again. Because it turns out that doesn't put him down.
No.
Yeah.
And they're pretty clear about that at the end of Promise of Blood is like, he's not dead.
He's just really mad now.
I mean, he was going to be mad regardless, but now he's definitely pissed off. Yeah. Because you had the temerity to like shoot him in the face before he could kill all of you.
Yeah, which was not cool. Not cool.
No. Anything else we want to bring up? This has been somewhat rambly, so if you've stuck it through, thank you for listening to our rambles. Oh, yeah, I feel like, especially if you get the audiobook, it's super easy to reread.
Yeah.
Because I know Kendric had read this right after I recommended it to him in like 2018.
Yep.
And it had been, I keep rereading it because I want to continue and then just kind of get bogged down in some of the stuff in Crimson Campaign. So I definitely feel like it has a lot of rereadability as a series. And I've heard amazing things, not just from Kendric, but from other people about how good that sequel series is.
It's so different, but it's still so good.
So like, because I know people that have read the original trilogy and we're like, that's okay. And then they read the sequel series and like, yeah, that's really good. So, yeah. I mean, again, I'm not really on board saying you need to read through all of these books and this is where it gets good, but I'm more than willing to make it through this trilogy in order to continue and see. Because I really hope, well, not hope, because you've kind of talked about Flora being better.
Yeah. Yeah,
I would like to see her be a really like awesome, badass female character because I haven't seen enough of that from Promise of Blood to satisfy my personal preferences.
Well, in the end of the first trilogy, you're going to want to jump into something because it's a bit heartbreaking. It's a very climactic ending.
Not surprising to me.
It's very climactic. He ends that thing. Oh boy, does he end that thing. There's obviously stuff to get picked up, but yep. there's a finality that he does, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna go lie down now.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. Well, and I've heard about some of the other characters from Kendric that show up in that sequel series, and they just sound like so much fun. Like standard McClellan larger than life type characters, but they sound
I don't again.
super
It's
fun.
like meta spoiler for the series on there, but the characters that survive into the sequel trilogy all evolve in not. I don't want to say it quite this way, but the best example I can think of is kind of like old Luke Skywalker and old Leia, where
Nice.
these are different characters now because a whole bunch of stuff has happened to them, and then because it's a little bit into the future, so there's like a lot of life has happened to them, and so they're all just a little bit developed and tired. And then they introduce a new character in one of the short stories, and he becomes a pretty big, both literally and figuratively, part of the story. Ben Sykes.
He's the one him and Valora are the two that I'm super stoked for.
Ben
I actually
Sykes
don't know any of the other
madman.
point of views that show up, but
Ben Sykes is a fun one because of his
fun.
morality. That's the whole thing I want to talk about later, because he's also not a nice man.
That honestly, I'm fine with. Like, I don't need my characters to be nice people. I mean, I love Lock Tomb, and like nobody in there is nice, so it's fine for. I like seeing better representation, which I think he'll get better about as this series and the next go. But I don't need my characters to be nice people. It's just not important to me. I mean, I'd like to not hate them.
Well, I mean,
but
Tomas is not a nice person either.
No, he really isn't.
He shoots a lot of people.
He's also not the best dad. Let's be real.
That's true. Yeah.
He's not very good at showing that he cares about people.
No, dude's got some issues.
Which is why Daniel has all the daddy issues.
Yes, he does. All over it. Written all over his face.
Correct. Okay. Anything else you want to chat about? Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. Hopefully this is fun for those of you who watch it on playback, and we will be returning. I'm going to read Crimson Campaign in March, which I assume you also join in, and we'll either have the live show for that at the end of March or the beginning of April. I'm going to try and be more on top of it as far as not waiting a month, because I didn't manage to finish Promise of Blood as quickly as I meant to. So we'll have that coming up. And we hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend. Bye.